A very good evening to all the postgraduates who have joined today. Today we have the 41st class of the postgraduate PG teaching initiative. The whole country has been watching this program, and we are very grateful today to Dr. Partha Biswas, who is the scientific chairman of All India Ophthalmic Society, chairman of the Ophthalmic Society of the Scientific Committee, AIUS. He is extremely busy, and we are very grateful to him for having taken out time to teach the postgraduates of Bihar and also from around the country. And he will be talking on compromised cataract surgery in compromised cornea, corneals, and after refractive surgery, something which will be very, very important for the rest of our lives, those who are going to take up anterior segment. And now I would also like to request Dr. Mamta Singh, who is a consultant at RIO, and she herself is a cornea specialist. I would like her to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Partha Biswas. Dr. Mamta Singh, please. Dr. Mamta?
Can you hear me, sir?
Now we can hear you.
Yes, sir. A very good evening to all of you, sir. And thank you, Satyajit, sir, for making me a part of this wonderful program. And this is my proud privilege to introduce Dr. Partha to all of us, to all of you. And nothing I can say would be enough for his towering personality or the kind of work he has done for all of us. He is the chairman scientific committee of AIOS, founder of BVI Foundation, reviewer of ophthalmology, the official journal of AO, the editor of Eastern Eye IJOC, a very well-known speaker in national conferences and different international conferences. And we are really privileged to hear you, sir, today. And sir is going to take the lecture on cataract surgery in compromised cornea, compromised granules, and cataract after refractive surgery. A very welcome you, sir, to this webinar. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
I want the postgraduates to know that today is the real day, because Dr. Partha Biswas is a student of Patna Medical College Hospital from PMCH. And then he worked in Patna and at Rajgir, and he is a real son of the soil. And all the postgraduates who are in ophthalmology, you have to aim as big as Partha Biswas, that from PMCH you can reach the pinnacle right to the top in ophthalmology in All India Ophthalmic Society. We are so proud of you, sir, and we are so grateful to you for your time today. Thank you so much, sir. You need to unmute.
Yeah. Satyajit, thank you so much. And Mamta, thank you extremely for the lovely introduction that you gave. It was so much of genuine love for a colleague that made you say so many things. But I really would say to Satyajit, yes, I'm 100% a son of the soil. And it's a great pleasure when Satyajit asked me to speak on compromised cornea. I said, Satyajit, compromised cornea is really not my forte. Let me add a few, but I will not let this opportunity go from me. So thank you very much, all of you. And I really thank everyone who is here as viewers. And I really hope that you will be learning a little, and I'll be learning also as much. And together we share so many things. And of course, as a very nice note that Satyajit put in, that, once we see our clinical experiences, once we learn from our clinical experiences, there are so many things that we learn from each other. And not only learn from each other, but also would like to emulate. So you have people like Satyajit and Mamta and the leadership at Bihar, from whom you can learn so much. And beyond that, we are all there for each one of you. And believe me, today it is your day. I mean, it's the students' day. The students demand and we give. So it is like that. It's not like 15, 20 years ago when we used to grapple over each other to see a case. Here, all of us are there to show you cases, to teach you whatever little we can. And why we know, and that is how Our future of ophthalmology is absolutely bright and clear. We know that the next gen is going to be much, much, much better than what we are. And that will really make us really proud. So without much ado, shall we go over to the lecture that I have been looking forward to as well, and I'll share my slides with you. Okay, is the slide visible?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Today we speak on cataract surgery and cataract surgery in compromised cornea. We'll add up a little on compromised zonules and also refractive surgery, which is a part of corneal surgery. And also when a cataract happens in such a status, so what do we do? How do we look at it? How do we think about it? And as we go on from slide to slide, I would really appreciate if you can put in your chat box any questions that you have, and I'd be very happy to answer anything that you wish. So let us look at these corneas, and once we look at these corneas, we know that when we see them on the slit lamp, there is much more than meets the eye. So a patient with a compromised cornea, when he comes, he again understands one thing, that I need to see well after my surgery. Now, whether it be just cataract surgery or corneal component or a combination of both of them, he is not bothered. He is bothered that I should be able to see well. And this is where pre-operative evaluation, proper history taking, and the whole works before the cataract surgery is also important. And proper planning, proper execution, having backups, and a proper post-operative care is all that we really need. So let us look at this situation where we have corneal opacity, scarred corneas. Now, the location and the level of the opacity are determining factors, and on the slit lamp, we need to be carefully assessment that where is the location of the opacity? Is it superficial? Is it deep? Does it transcend the whole of the cornea? And it's very important also to make drawings of the opacities so that we know that after a cataract surgery, whether it's phacoemulsification or a combined surgery, where is the location of the opacity? And thereby, if it is an eccentric opacity, then it just might not require any corneal component at all, and you need to do just a phacoemulsification, and that is a planning that you can take up early in the pre-operative situation. However, when there are visually significant opacities, something like this, what you have in the photograph there, then of course a combined surgery is what is required. So let us go to the corneal surgeries, which is a combined surgery with the cataract, and if it is a phaco plus a keratoplasty, if all the layers of the cornea are involved, then it is what a penetrating keratoplasty is what is required, and a closed chamber phacoemulsification followed by penetrating keratoplasty is better definitely than the open sky technique, and that is what is used to be done at one point of time. Again, a sequential cataract surgery after PKP. Here, what is the benefit? Should we do a sequential cataract surgery after a PKP? Yes, there is a point to be discussed, and it definitely reduces the chance of an intraocular lens surprise and also causes more endothelial damage, leading to a higher risk of graft failure. So both these things have to be balanced. If there is a corneal opacity, so how do you gauge the intraocular lens power? The K readings definitely are going to be haywire, and thereby the K readings or the intraocular lens calculation of the other eye is then a very, very important aspect, and that is how you can judge an approximate intraocular lens power for the affected eye. However, if it is a sequential cataract surgery, then the possibility of an IOL surprise is less because you have a cornea that is more or less a good cornea, and you can take all the readings as per what would be in the future as well. So if it has to be a phaco with lamellar keratoplasty, it is just superficial and all the deeper layers are involved, we need to be very sure what is the level of the involvement of the cornea. Now, a compromised cornea just does not mean corneal opacity. Okay. A cornea can be compromised for several different reasons, and a severe dry eye is a compromised cornea. So, and these can cause a definite error in the biometry, delayed post-operative healing, prolonged post-operative pain and discomfort, and the patient ultimately is not happy with the cataract surgery that you could have done to the best of your expertise. And in such situations, the severe dry eye can actually be exacerbated not only because of the different drops or the drops that would have to go in, and it is a difficult situation when a pre-existing dry eye becomes worsens and causes more difficulty for the patient. So here is a situation when one needs to identify a dry eye, and if it is severe, then it has to be treated. Treatment of MGD and blepharitis is also important, and the use of preservative-free drops are important in such situations. Now, corneal dystrophies. Whenever a patient of a corneal dystrophy would come to the outdoor of the medical colleges, everybody would crowd on, oh, it's a corneal dystrophy. It's this, it's that. And it is really quite a sensation to see it on the slit lamp. However, when this patient comes in for a cataract surgery, so it is important again to see what level of the opacification is in the media. And it might need a superficial keratectomy or a concurrent keratectomy before the cornea is free of the opacity. One of the commonest and most important entities are Fuchs endothelial corneal dystrophy, and I'll show you a video in which we had such an instance where Fuchs endothelial corneal dystrophy was there, and what do you do with a cataract in such a situation. So the corneal dystrophy, and it is a dilemma. So you have identified that there is Fuchs corneal dystrophy, and the question that you're asked by your senior or by your consultant is, when do you think it is important to operate a cataract in such a case? So is it an early cataract surgery when the cataract is soft and the risk of progression is still there, or should we wait for the cataract to become in such a situation that the patient loses vision and then to operate? Here it is important, and it is very important to take the patient into confidence and to ascertain that this is the amount of risk of a cataract surgery at this point of time. This risk might be a little more for a corneal decompensation if the cataract becomes hard. So, though the patient might be seeing well or might be seeing to an okay grade with a cataract that is there, the consultant can definitely think of waiting to an extent and waiting so that the patient wants the cataract surgery. But at this time, it has to be discussed that a possibility of a corneal graft is a possibility and a corneal surgery might be a possibility in the future. What would be the intraoperative techniques or pearls that we need to have when we are doing a patient with cataract surgery with the corneal dystrophy, especially one with Fuchs endothelial corneal dystrophy? Well, the dispersive OVD is a very, very important factor, and to protect the corneal endothelium, which is required. The parameters of the phacoemulsification must be as low as possible, and the intraocular lens that is preferred should be a hydrophilic lens, and remembering the fact that it is important that there could be a tamponade of a future endothelial keratoplasty. Lens of hydrophobic IOL is preferred over the hydrophobic IOL is preferred over the hydrophilic. Now, a preoperative counseling in such situations is very important, and a counseling because of the slower post-operative recovery as well as the need for an endothelial keratoplasty is an important factor and is a reality and has to be discussed with the patient every time the patient comes in. A slower recovery is something that a patient should expect, and one should be very realistic and in telling how long the recovery would be. Now let's come to another aspect, and it is an infective condition, a past infective condition that has occurred, a history of recurrent viral keratitis, and a risk of reactivation in these post-surgery cases. It is a rarity, but it can happen. So if a patient has a history of recurrent viral keratitis, one needs to caution the patient, one needs to caution oneself as well, that there could be a possibility of a reactivation in such cases. Post-operatively, the topical NSAIDs may be used for longer time and instead of steroids, and to decrease this risk. If, of course, a recurrent activation occurs and it has come, then the antiviral has to be used, and oral valsartan or are typically in the dose of 500 milligrams 3 times a day is what is to be given for 2 weeks post-operative. So this is again a good history taking is imperative in patients when you have seen a small amount of opacity and you dig into the history and you find that there has been an effect of viral keratitis. Now let's look at the ectatic disorders. And these ectatic disorders definitely are compromised boundaries. And keratoconus poses a unique surgical challenge in these cases. Now the use of RGP, which these keratoconus eyes might be using, may lead to an erroneous biometry. And most important, the progression of the corneal disease per se, because corneal ectatic conditions and keratoconus are progressive conditions, and the changes in the values of the K values might change considerably and thereby lead to an erroneous biometry. The progressing disease must definitely be treated with a CXL prior to surgery, and if a patient has stopped progressing, it's a keratoconus eye, and the progression has been halted by PXL prior to the surgery, then it is a patient where it can be taken up for cataract surgery, and the intraocular lens of choice in such a patient has to be discussed with the patient, because these patients usually land up with high cylinders. But is it possible for every patient to go in for a toric IOL to correct that high astigmatism? Here again, a very, very important word of caution, because the toric IOL, if the axis changes by 3 degrees and beyond, then the tonicity of the IOL is lost gradually. Thereby, if these high astigmatisms have to be considered, and if the patient is willing to take up the possibility of having a change in the astigmatism, then to correct most of the astigmatism and not all, a toric IOL may be helpful. However, this choice is on the surgeon's forte and should be taken by the surgeon and the patient in consideration. Now, preoperatively in such compromised corneas, let us just overall talk about the detailed discussion and the visual expectation of such patients are important. Biometry is always a challenge in these patients, and keratometric values, because of irregular corneas, can be different. And since a 1 diopter difference in keratometry has an impact on the final biometry, erroneous calculations might lead to significant surprise in the refraction. So these have to be checked manually. Keratometry has to be checked manually, optical biometry and Pentacam needs to be done whenever possible. And a preoperative, again, OCT is important to discuss also the macular status with the patient. Premium intraocular lenses are contraindicated in such eyes since compromised corneas may lead to further loss of corneal sensitivity. And these intraocular lenses, the toric intraocular lenses, may be used to correct as much as possible of the high astigmatism, remembering the fact that it might not be able to correct the poor astigmatism. Now, the intraoperative importance of these and removing the edematous corneal epithelium increases the visibility, and you'll see a case that we'll be sharing with you where the corneal epithelium was removed, which was edematous, and considerably improved the visibility. Trypan blue to use as a stain on the anterior capsule important. Capsular excess should be initiated in any quadrant which has the transparent window. And one very important factor for all of us who are practicing cataract surgery in these compromised corneas, to tilt the eye to the microscope so that one is able to visualize as much as possible from the side of the opacity. And the other aspect is a retroillumination. Use of an endoilluminator is very helpful in these patients as well. A post-operative follow-up for the progression of the corneal disease is very important. And whenever a combined surgery is thought of, the cataract surgeon and the corneal surgeon should coordinate and cooperate. Usually our corneal colleagues are extremely good cataract surgeons, and they would be happy to do a PKP with a phaco, a triple procedure, or a superficial keratectomy with a phaco, or a DALC with a phaco, or a DSEC or a table keratectomy with a phaco, or keratoprosthesis also with a phaco. Now I'd like to show you a few videos where we have compromised corneas and so this has been shared for our use for this teaching purpose by one of our very senior colleagues, a very, very well-known teacher of cornea, Dr. Samar Basak. So this is Dr. Samar Basak's patient whom he has treated as a 64-year gentleman, a teacher by profession, and was referred to him for phaco plus PK. So in this patient, there was gross diminution of vision for the last 6 months and history of HSV keratitis. And he had 4 records of HSV keratitis. The last attack was 6 months back and was as of now on just tear substitutes and sodium chloride eye drops, non-diabetic, non-hypertensive, and the left eye was a lost eye. So dissect triple in HSV endothelitis. Is it possible? So this is definitely a case in which a lot of thought has gone in, and on examination it was just finger counting and hand movements. There was a lot of corneal edema, as you can see, mild stromal vascularization, and there was no active inflammation. So Dr. Basak, what he questioned himself is, if phaco with an intraocular lens is possible, then why not a dissect triple under the cover of oral steroids and aceclidine? So 7 days prior to the surgery, the patient was put on oral prednisolone and oral aceclidine. So a phaco plus IOL plus a dissect is what was planned. So as you can see, the opacity is quite extensive, and here he changes over to the coaxial illumination, and you can immediately see that you can do off the rhexis, or that stained rhexis, quite well, and you can see the rhexis margin running in as well. Now, while he's doing the phacoemulsification, So what he definitely is doing is he does the phacoemulsification, puts in the intraocular lens, and this is the scoring that he is doing for the dissect part. This is the endothelial scoring that is done, and the removal of the endothelium, and the endothelium strips out quite well, and it's quite a challenging case. And now he changes over to the normal illumination, takes the the graft from the post button, and now under the bubble it unfolds inside, and this is what he does to, so that the graft is well placed, and it becomes centered. This stroking action is very important to center the graft. So
Sorry
this
to
was.
disturb you, sir. I'm sorry to disturb you, sir. I think
Hello.
we cannot see the video.
Oh, you could not see the video?
Okay.
I see. The video was not coming at all?
No, sir.
Oh,
Just stuck there.
I see. That is. Oh, let me start the video once again then maybe.
Sure.
Now, is it showing now?
It's still there on the slide.
Uh-huh.
It's still there on the same slide, sir.
It is not showing now also.
No, sir.
Okay.
Rishi, can you help here?
So is that the video are inbuilt in the presentation?
Yeah, the video is there in the presentation itself. I just will have to just a minute, please. Okay, let me see if I can show this video. This one, if I can show, let me see if I can show this one.
So you can minimize or stop sharing this one, and then you can open the video with some player.
Is this showing now?
No, sir. Actually, your presentation slide is there. Cataract surgery in compromised zones.
अभी वीडियो शो कर रहा है क्या?
No, sir. Because as of now, sir, you are sharing the presentation.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
एक what I suggest is, let me go to the next presentation on the compromised zonules, and then I'll show these two videos later maybe.
Sure,
So
sir.
that's one.
Shall we do that?
Yes, sir. We can go ahead with the presentation right now. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So, has the presentation come now?
No, sir. So the earlier presentation is there, cataract surgery in compromised venues.
अच्छा.
Slide number 13.
Just a minute.
Yes, sir. You can close this presentation, sir, and the next presentation then we can share.
One minute. চলে এসো তো একবার টিচার করো.
डिजाइन के नाम पे तुम कलर को
Can you see this one?
No, sir. Actually, the older, I think, sir, old presentation is there. The cursor is showing on the minimize that icon. You need to close that presentation, sir, from the top right hand side.
Wait. This is the presentation now.
Sir.
Cataract surgery in minimized in compromised venues, is it?
Sir. The slide is visible.
It's still visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
তাড়াতাড়ি এসো.
You can close this slide, sir, from the cross sign.
Is it closed now?
Yes, sir. Now it is closed.
Achha. Okay.
So you can click on that share icon.
Okay. Is this new slide coming?
No, not yet, sir.
Share icon. Share icon. Share icon. Just check if the video is playing now.
So now the slides are there.
Is the video
yes,
playing?
Yeah, video is playing now, sir.
Okay, just a minute. One minute. Okay, is the video playing now?
Yeah, right, sir. It's playing.
Right. So the voice has gone off. Hello.
You are audible, sir.
I'm audible. Okay, fine.
Yes.
So this is a patient with the compromised cornea, and this is something that we have to do a phacoemulsification with the DISEC, and this is a patient who is undergoing the phacoemulsification, and once the phacoemulsification is done, the next part is the intraocular lens implantation and placing the intraocular lens right in the head. Then the next part. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir. The voice is coming.
Right. So the next part is the scoring of the cornea, and from the donor button, the graft tissue is removed and then placed gently inside the anterior chamber, and then an air bubble is placed in the anterior chamber to now have the donor cornea tissue stick to the corneal, the recipient cornea. So this becomes the end of the procedure, and with that, the patient is placed post-operatively on oral prednisolone, oral aceclidine, and topical prednisolone eye drops with topical oxytocin and mild cycloplegics. Let's look at the patient, and in 3 months, the patient's BCVA has come to 680. The corneal edema has cleared. There are stromal infiltrates which are none. Areas of lipid keratopathy is there, and NCT is quite within normal limits. And the prednisolone continues. The oral aceclidine also. And 6 months later, the patient is much better. 612, much better, is a much happier patient. And the specular count, the morphology, you can see that how good is the specular count in such a patient. So I'll come to the next part of the presentation, and that is the one on phacoemulsification and compromised solutes. And is the slide share okay? Hello.
No, sir, not yet.
Yes, sir.
Just,
Visible.
we need to go to the next presentation as well.
Phacoemulsification, compromised zonules, is that okay?
No, sir, not yet.
Not there. Yeah, how do I?
सोसाइटी में फर्क से यही क्या होगा
Is it visible now?
Yes, sir, now we can see the slide.
Okay, fine. So we come to this part where phacoemulsification and compromised zonules, and this is something that's very important for all cataract surgeons. And the definition of subluxation and a dislocated lens is something that we need to revise just a little bit maybe. And subluxation of lens, or a malposition of the crystalline lens, when it is partially displaced but contained within the lens space, and there are just about few zonular attachments which are present. So this is the definition of subluxation, whereas a dislocated lens lies completely outside the lens patellar fossa in the anterior chamber, free floating in the vitreous or directly on the retina, and is not attached by zonules. So this, of course, is what dislocated lens is, as different to a subluxated lens. You can see the photographs, and the lens on your right is in the anterior chamber, and the lens on your left is a subluxated lens, which still has. Now the etiology can be so many: the congenital, the ectopic lentis, the ectopic lentis epipulae, hereditary ectopic lentis, Marfan syndrome, etc. And the acquired can be trauma, which is the commonest, and weak zonules, hypermature cataract, chronic cyclitis with uveitis, RP, RD, syphilis, ophthalmus, severe or pathological myopia, and ciliary body tumors, all acquired. So let us look at the congenital hereditary ectopic lentis with systemic manifestations. And in these systemic disorders can be Marfan syndrome, cystinuria, Wilbur-Shahzani syndrome, Rieger's anomaly, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hyperglycemia, sulfite oxidase deficiency, Sturge-Weber's, and Krieger-Sonn. Now, if it is a superotemporal luxation, and this is what is seen most commonly in Marfan syndrome. But that does not mean that a Marfan syndrome might not present as a subluxation in any of the other quadrants. Superotemporal is the commonest. Again, inferior subluxation is commonly seen in homocystinuria, and vice versa as well. Homocystinuria can have other places of subluxation, but inferior syndromes. Associated ocular anomalies along with the subluxation can be a congenital glaucoma, ophthalmos, pseudoexfoliation syndrome, chronic uveitis, retinitis pigmentosa, megalocornea, aniridia, hypermetropic cataract, or hyperemia. And it can present as a lenticular astigmatism. It can present as fluctuating vision dramatically, as the vision may alternate between the phakic and the ephetic status. And thereby the patient might suddenly say that I'm seeing well, and at times I'm not seeing well at all. And this can happen I had a particular patient who said that while I'm standing, I'm seeing so well. When I lie down, I cannot see. And when he was lying down, the inferior part, which was subluxated, would tilt down and he would not be able to see the ceiling. So a monoocular diplopia is also a possibility, and a poor near vision, which is loss of accommodating power. Now, when a workup needs to be done in such cases, it's important that proper workup be done, and if there is a history of ocular trauma, all the parts of the eye should be well seen and well investigated, that there is no other injury to any of the systemic structures. The systemic history is important when we think of the systemic diseases and cardiovascular diseases, especially in Marfan syndrome, skeletal problems in Marfan syndrome, which is homocystinuria, family history of consanguinity, mental retardation, and unexplained deaths at young age. So these would be important when we are dealing with the autosomal recessive condition, including homocystinuria, hyperglycemia, ectopia lentis, or sulfatoxylase deficiency. These are important, and therefore the family history in all such patients should be taken. The ocular examination, the corneal diameter is important because at times the Marfan syndrome is associated with the cornea, and the cover test for strabismus, good retinoscopy and refraction. At times, the Marfan's a patient might not be willing or might not be a good patient for his systemic ailment. For example, a heart condition associated with Marfan's. And if you can refract from the ephekic side, and if the patient can still see well when the subluxation of the Marfan's is very much out, then even if the patient gets back about 6/18 vision from the ephekic part of the pupil, then also that is a possibility where you can tell the patient that you can see with glasses. If you wish, we go ahead for the surgery. So these are important aspects which have to be taken case per case, patient per patient. The slit lamp examination is very important. A dilated fundus examination, gonioscopy, B-scan if the medium is big, and of course UPM and AS. The evaluation of the lens position is important, and to identify phacodemesis or cataract, and the exact degree of corneal loss. Here, what I always do is to make a drawing of the slit lamp examination and to see how much and to draw how much of the area is luxated. So this is important because whatever you're seeing on the slit lamp may not be the actuality, but what you're seeing in the slit lamp is definitely there, and it possibly is a lot more, at least 3 to 4 clock hours more at times than what you're seeing on the slit lamp assessment. The exact degree of corneal loss as much as possible. If there's vitreous in the anterior chamber, that's another very important finding. And if it is vitreous in the anterior chamber, one must remember that possibly this vitreous has to be tackled first before any of the other aspects of the surgery has been negotiated. If it is an inferior subluxation, indicates 360 degree of corneal insufficiency combined with the effect of gravity at times. And the choice of the surgical procedure is very important. Therefore, if a superior subluxation is there up to 4 clock hours, and here an intraocular lens with phacoemulsification is to be done, then a CTR is what is to be a choice. However, a second choice is just intraocular lens implantation with haptic being there to stretch the back. But just remember, this is if it is superior with just 4 clock hours of subluxation. If it is inferior with 3 clock hours of subluxation, CTR with IOL implantation usually does. If it is anywhere greater than 3 to 6 clock hours, CTR or a single loop, modified CTR with a single loop is what is important, because the anchoring device in such cases is important. And if it is, of course, greater than 6 hours to 9 clock hours, a modified CTR with double loop with IOL implantation is important. And more than 9 clock hours or more. And if there's generalized weakness of the sonules, then possibly an intracapsular cataract extraction with Snell fixated or an anterior chamber IOL, iris clip lens, or a glued IOL is what can be done. The cataract surgery, the incision is very important, and here the incision should always preferably be away from the area of the sonular weakness, and liberal amount of high molecular weight viscoelastic is important. The capsulorhexis, where to start the capsulorhexis again is very important, and the area which is farthest from the area of dialysis is where the capsulorhexis should start, so that you can wind up a few clock hours before you come to the dialyzed area. And capsulorhexis is more easily performed with the forceps, and microforceps is very important than with the cystotome, which is not the right tool, because with the forceps you can actually pull and circumvent any opacities or any fibrotic areas and make it as much of a circle as possible, whereas with a cystotome you simply drag on the capsule. So when to use a CTR post-traumatic with small focal area dialysis with otherwise strong adjacent zonular apparatus, and the CTR may not be required. In cases of mild zonular laxity, but with a progressive pathological state like a pseudo-exfoliation and a zonular problem that might be expected to worsen over time, a CTR should be used. Therefore, all patients with pseudo-exfoliation, whether they have a subluxation at the time of cataract surgery or not, should have a CTR placed. In a young patient with such a progressive disease, a sutured CTR or a Snell fixation is. Now, capsulorhexis is one of the toughest and one of the most challenging steps, and puncturing the anterior capsule at times is not easy, and as zonular countertraction is compromised in young eyes. The lens capsule is highly elastic, and a lack of the anterior posterior barrier in zonulopathy leads to the loss of red reflex following the irrigation of trident into the AC. So it's if there is an area of subluxation and you think that the trypan blue, once you have placed into the AC, might go behind the lens and into the vitreous and stain the whole vitreous, and then you do not have the retro illumination, the red reflex set on. So then it is best to place an OVD in the anterior chamber and then paint a few drops of trypan blue over them. The CCC should be centered on the crystalline lens and not on the pupil or the corneal apex, because the lens is shifted. So at least 2 millimeters of margin should be kept between the capsulorhexis edge and the equator, because this is the most difficult part, where you're actually going across on the area of the dialysis, and these rhexis can actually run out or drag out to the equator of that particular site. So initiating the rhexis is very important, and at times even MVR blade might have to be used to puncture the loose elastic capsule. FLACS has become, the femtolaser assisted cataract surgery has become very important in subluxated cataracts, and has a lot of advantages in the less severe cases of subluxated cataracts. However, the femtolaser cataract is not available in every clinic or in every part of the country. Therefore, it is important to understand that if a femto laser cataract surgery cannot be done, definitely the manual cataract surgery can be done with expertise. However, these are patients, when one is only confident of tackling such a patient, one should do. And if one is learning, of course, should be done with the help of a supervisor who is there to help in the different steps of the surgery. Though the femtosecond laser does not depend on the counter resistance of the sonnular support, which is a very important aspect, and is able to cut a circular anterior capsule opening despite the subluxation of the lens, as long as the lens tilt is not excessive. So the femtosecond laser has actually given a lot of importance in such situations. We do use the femtosecond laser quite well. When to use a CTR, to place it quite early, and this has the ability to maintain that expanded bag and to support the zonules during the different during the different stages of the pupil-emulsification. However, fixing the CTR can be challenging, and we'll be showing you a few videos in which the CTR has gone haywire. And one dictum that is followed by most surgeons is the CTR to be placed as late as you can, but as soon as you must. Therefore, the CTR is a great tool and has really improved the outcomes with the cataract surgery. The hydrodissection and the viscodissection are critical, and replenishing the dispersive OVD volume into the capsular fornix throughout the case is very, very important. So what is important, again, the lens will dictate what it wants to do, and the surgeon will have to follow suit. Therefore, the emulsification is very important. It has to be gentle emulsification as much as possible in the bag. But of course, if it is not possible, then a few fragments can be removed to the anterior chamber and emulsified as well. However, replenishing the anterior chamber with viscoelastic is very important. Machine parameters, lower aspiration and flow parameters reduces the turbulence and maintains a greater control over the fragments of the lens between the liberation from the bag and aspiration by the phaco medium. Important, and the IOL selection, if an intact and a properly fixed centered capsular bag is there and a circumferential CTR is in place, a one-piece or a three-piece IOL would be the appropriate IOL for insertion. Now, toric IOLs, multifocal IOLs, accommodating IOLs. Now, these intraocular lenses, which are supposed to be premium intraocular lenses, must be thought very carefully before thinking of a possibility of placing one of these intraocular lenses. Of course, the toric intraocular lenses can be placed, remembering the fact that the toricity might be lost if the axis rotates, and the astigmatic control might not be total. Multifocal intraocular lenses, again, some people have done it, but the multifocal lenses, if they become a little off-center, they can lose their multifocality. Therefore, these things need to be discussed with the patient before going into such a case. So now let us look at a few videos, and so what we have is an intumescent cataract which is subluxated. So we've placed that the rhexis marker there, and you can see that I'm trying to make a very small rhexis. I'm just able to puncture it, and now what we are doing is trying to grasp it and re-grasp it. And before that, what we do is we milk out the milky fluid from the bag, and so as to debulk the intralenticular contents and thereby decrease the intralenticular pressure. Then we place the CTR, and the placement of the CTR is important. And as we place the CTR, it needs to go right into the bag. Once it is placed nicely in the bag, then of course the removal of the cortex is the part that we have to be a little careful about. Here in this condition, most of the cortical matter came off. Here, what is the difficulty with the CTR in the bag is you have the CTR inside the bag, and removal of the cortical matter can be a little slow and can be a little challenging. One has to be very patient and careful so that the removal is taken off well. So here we have removed most of the cortex and the matter and polishing of the anterior capsule as much as possible. And remembering the fact that the lens that we are going to place has to go right into the bag. We use a single piece lens for this patient and place it into the bag under cover of the viscoelastic. Remembering the fact that the viscoelastic must be placed inside the bag and the remove, and as you can see, it's a nice and round pupil and it's a well-centered lens. Look at another video, and as I was saying, the trouble. So we have a large subluxation in this patient. We have a large subluxation in this patient, and as you can see, as I mentioned, what we are doing is we are going ahead with the rhexis from the place that the subluxation was not there. So we completed with the capsule rhexis faucet, the micro capsule rhexis faucet. And you can see that with the pull, we are able to get a more or less circular opening. And here, of course, because it's a large degree of subluxation, we place the CTR in the bag. Now look at this. The CTR has slipped and I'm not able to place it in the bag. So again, what happens is the CTR slips once again and it goes right into the instrument that was trying to dial it in. So now I think I've placed the CTR in the bag. No, I still have not. And it has gone into the anterior chamber in the angle of the anterior chamber. So I take the CTR and now with under direct visualization, we are trying to place the CTR in the bag. So now after all these attempts, it does seem that the CTR can at times become quite dicey. And look, now the second instrument is what has the CTR placed. Ultimately, we are able to place the CTR in the bag. It was just to show you that it's important that the right technique is followed at the right time. And these are instances where you need to be patient and not obviously leave the CTR half in the bag and half in the sulcus, or half in the bag, half in the chamber, which would be disaster. So removal of the cortex and the nuclear matter is not so difficult, and you can see a nice and a stable bag here. So I'll just go on to the next video. Now, here is a patient in which we have luxation, and here what we are going to do is we have marked rhexis, and it's difficult. You can see that it's nearly 270 degrees of subluxation there, and able to carry on with the trypan blue stained anterior capsule, and the cystotome here, a gentle action of the cystotome has been able to drag the anterior capsule rhexis, and we are able to complete the anterior capsule rhexis quite well. So once we complete the anterior capsule rhexis, then because it's a large subluxation, so we place the CTR right. So once it goes into the bag, then things are much better. You can see that the subluxation is settling, and we are working against the subluxation, and you can see with a straight chop, we are able to take off as much as possible of the nuclear matter, and to do a good nuclear dissection is quite important. At times, it's important also, the rotation can become a little difficult, and therefore, gentle hydrodissection time and again is something that is quite useful and quite efficient. So we do hydrodissection, but what is that? So here is when we need to put on the support to the capsule. And here I'm supporting the capsule with the iris hooks, which are devices meant to support the iris, but it can also support the capsule as well. So this was what I wanted to show you, that it becomes quite simple by if you support it with the capsule, the capsular hooks or the iris hooks. Now, let's look at this video, and here what is we are doing so here again, it's quite a large subluxation, and but it's a softer nucleus. So we are able to do good capsulorhexis in this soft nucleus, and once good capsulorhexis is done, see again, it is possible to do it with the cystosome itself, and the nucleus can be removed quite well. But here again, as you can see, that we are placing in the viscoelastic as much as possible, and since we have done the hyperemulsification, most of the nucleus is out, so we place the CTR now quite late, and this prevents the entrapment of the cortical fibers in the CTR, and is actually a good technique if we can manage to do a hyperemulsification with a subluxated bag, and CTR is now not going to grasp the cortical matter between it and the capsule. So this becomes quite an interesting and good way of placing the CTR, and you can see that we have the placement of a single piece intraocular lens in the bag. So let's look at another situation. This is one of our very favorite videos, and this patient we call Bhuvan, and when he first came to us, there was huge amount of vitreous hemorrhage, high fever, and we thought that there was an intraocular foreign body as well. And we did a primary suture to the patient, and the patient came back after 3 months, and we saw that the vitreous hemorrhage had cleared and there was no intraocular foreign body. So we take this patient up for surgery for the cataract, which was progressing, and what you can see, of course, is traumatic aniridia, and there's hardly a little bit of iris that is sticking together, and it's a grossly subluxated lens. But however, in these traumatic cases of subluxation, the lens is actually not so grossly subluxated, and the sonules which are still there can hold on. So here the devices at times are not required to be placed, and thereby we place this intraocular. First, the device that is placed is, of course, the CTR that is placed, and then what we do is do a hyperemulsification of this patient, and with the hyperemulsification, you can see that a direct chop is done, the removal of the fragments, and so the removal of the fragments, and I was suspecting that there could be a possible posterior capsular rupture, and therefore you can see that one fragment is still there, but yet I'm placing the intraocular lens in the bag, and once it goes in the bag, it settles quite well, and thankfully there is no capsular rupture. So the next part is, of course, creating the iris, and we put the artificial iris. These are two rings which have to be placed one over the other, and you can see that the first ring that is placed is done, and the next ring is going to be placed. And these reconstruction rings, this is a reconstruction ring which is not made originally, it's not made by Norsher, it's made by an Indian company, and they make it extremely well. And it's nearly 7 years now since I did the surgery, and the patient still has very well-centered intraocular lens. It has the reconstruction rings are also in place, and they have not lost their pigments. So that shows that what we can, the indigenous products are also very good and very useful in such patients. So the patient, when he gained 6/9 vision and 6 vision, and is a very joyous patient even today. So let us look at the last of these videos, and this is a video in which you can see that it's a very, very hard cataract. This patient has waited 15 years for this cataract to become nice and hard and rock hard. And now it's our job to do something for this patient. You can see it's half subluxating into the anterior chamber. So what we do is we place in viscous viscoelastic and then smear the trypan glue over this viscoelastic. And getting a posterior capsule, an anterior capsulorhexis is quite a tough job, but it can be done, and we go ahead and do anterior capsulorhexis for this patient, and then place the zonular hooks, and these are supportive devices, very atraumatic, and are holding the nucleus well in place. The next part is placing in the CTR, and the CTR, once placed, can go in very nicely, and the amount of subluxation that there is definitely help. But you can see that it's a large area of subluxation, and we possibly need an anchoring device for this patient. So a very gentle rotation is attempted and does rotate, and obviously this is an edited video, and you can see how tough this black cataract is, and over and on with the amount of subluxation. So this is going to be definitely a tricky job, and we do phase by phase dissection of this nucleus and a direct shock, and you can see that it's gradually cracking from the periphery, and we are able to remove one small piece of the pie and cut the whole of the nucleus, breaking them into multiple small pies and removing these pies out. So once the pies are removed, then it is the time that we need to see that what lens is to be placed. And it's also important in such hard cataracts with subluxation that a small fragment of the nucleus might get embedded or lodged somewhere, and you might not know it. So it's very important to clear off all the debris before we close. An intraocular lens, which is a single piece intraocular lens, we place into the bag, and once it has been placed in the bag, it goes in quite well. But of course, as you can see that there is an amount of subluxation, and anchoring device has to be placed. So here what we do is we place a cylinder ring, and we place it, and after getting it threaded, it's placed right inside this as the anchoring device. And because it's a traumatic case, so the rest of the zonules are quite otherwise fine, and this one device is good enough to anchor it in anchor the bag to the sclera, and with that you can see that it's quite well located, well centered, and we close the patient. So I think we'll be running out of time, but I've got at least 15-20 more videos that I could show, but I'll not show these. The next part of my talk, which is on refractive surgery, and is the slide visible? Okay. Is it visible? Okay, shall I carry on? Okay, so right. So we have these patients of post-refractive surgery, and whenever we need to do phacoemulsification in these cases of post-refractive surgery, then there are certain challenges. Now, the challenge in these unique cases are a unique challenge to the cataract surgeon himself. The patient
Sir,
used to
we can't
use
see the slide.
cannot
I'm
see the
sorry to
slide.
disturb you. No, sir, we can't see.
Now can you see? Can you see now?
Yes, sir. Now this is visible.
It is visible?
Yes, sir, definitely.
Okay. So the post-refractive surgery phacoemulsification is indeed a challenge, and this is a unique challenge to the cataract surgeon because these patients have been used to spectacle independence, and at times they have unrealistic expectations. And as it stands today, the current biometric formulas, so many of them have come in, the online formulas, but still there's an element of risk and inaccuracy even in the biometric formulas of today. So what we actually are scared of, we are scared of the refractive surprise that can come in with these patients. And the traditional formula to lose accuracy in these patients, if it is a post-myopic refractive surgery and there is a refractive surprise, a post-operative hyperopia can result, which is extremely disconcerting, and a patient is really, really very unhappy. And if it is a hyperopic refractive surgery, the patients can end up with a post-operative myopia. Again, something that is very, very uh, not fine for the patient. So what are the sources of error? If we are to see them, what are they? It's mainly the keratometry, and that is the most important source of error because the corneal measurements which are taken from the central 2.5 or the 3 millimeter zone, and this has been flattened by the keratorefractive surgery. So that assumption of the spherocylindrical cornea leads to an overestimation of 15 to 25%. And the relationship between the anterior and the posterior cornea is also altered, and therefore the assumption that the refractive index is 1.3375 becomes fallacious. So are the errors, and these come into the formula as well. So the newer generation formula utilize the relationship between the K and the ACT to estimate the EL, the effective lens position, and after a myopic refractive surgery, these formulae predict false shallow ACT, and that leads to an anterior effective lens position, EL. This leads to an underestimation of the intraocular lens power and causing the postoperative hyperopic surprise. So what are the formulae that are used in these patients? If you go on to the historical method, which most of us don't use at all these days, it was first described by Holiday in a post-RK patient. It requires a PKRS, the keratofractive surgery, keratometry and spherical equivalent. If that is present, things are much easier, but usually those values or dark lines not present in most patients. So this results in a large variation of the intraocular lens power and a refractive surprise. So this is discarded as of now. The double K formula, which was first described by Aaron Murray and similar to the historical formula, again requires preoperative data. Now the ACRS online, and this is freely accessible in the website, which allows the user to input the data available with or without the preoperative data. And multiple formula are available to calculate the intraocular lens power. Average of all formulae is also displayed. Now, the tomography is a very important tool in analyzing the anterior as well as the posterior corneal curvature and should be used as often as possible. The intraoperative aphakic calculation. Now, this again is a very important aspect, and I would lay great stress on this, which I still use as a cross check. And on the table, retinoscopy after extraction of the cataractal lens can be very accurate and can actually choose the right lens and without a surprise. So the intraoperative aphakic aberrometry is another tool that can be used with great importance. But again, this is not so possibly available with most of us. But what can always be done is the on-table retinoscopy by one of your best optometrists who can tell you that this is what the retinoscopy value is. So limitation includes the alteration of the intraocular pressure, the patient fixation, and the pressure of the specular, and the ELT prediction is still not so good. This is what happens in our OT room, and when the patient is trained and the cataract has been removed, the retinoscopy is done by our optometrist, and we calculate it on by nearly doubling the value of the retinoscopy, and of course putting it a little on the myopic side so that we don't end up in the hyperopic. The role of preoperative counseling is very important, and we should do proper counseling. And here I would definitely suggest that you do not leave it to your counselors, and the importance of having a realistic expectation of the patient is very important. As I said, that these patients have been used to without glasses. Now, the presbyopia correcting IOLs may not be the correct choice in these patients because of the possibility of errors and residual irregular astigmatism. The intraoperative challenges, these are important. So if it is a RK phacoemulsification, and as you can see, here we have a patient with more than 8 incisions, and the corneal incision has to be avoided. So how do we actually avoid the corneal incision? And so what we do is we avoid the corneal incisions. There are so many of them, because if the corneal incisions are not avoided, what can actually happen is all the RK incisions can just open up. So it's important to avoid the corneal incision, and what we have done in this case is made a little scleral pocket tunnel, and we are going to operate through a scleral incision in this case. We also put in a 5.5 rhexis marker, and we are fashioning the rhexis so that we have a nice central rhexis. So now the importance of the scleral tunnel is very important. It has a very strong bridge, and if that bridge is nice and strong, the RK incisions will never. So it's important to assess whether you have a clean area from where you can actually negotiate the tunnel, and see that it does not hamper the RK incisions. So again, though some RK incisions are so fragile that they can at times open up, therefore also a low portal height or an intraocular pressure measurement that is on the lower side can definitely be one important aspect here. So removal of the cortex and everything, and then placing the entropy lens right in the back is important. Remembering the fact that there is bound to be some amount of astigmatism for these patients, but that should be acceptable, and most of the refractive error should be corrected as much as possible. So this is opening of an RK incision that we have a photograph here. So if an RK incision opens up, it has to be sutured well, and the sutures have to be released also in due time. A mystery case. Now let me present a small mystery case. It's a 43-year-old female, and her comes over, and her husband is also there, and says that she's not seeing well. And what we see is a grade 2 cataract on the right eye more than the left, and then we plan for phacoemulsification with a different lens. Now, after everything has been done, she comes back alone, and she says that, I used to wear thick glasses before my marriage, and it was removed by some surgery 19 years ago. And then what we do is we do a Pentacam for this, and this is an invaluable tool to detect the previous refractive surgery. So here we have the Pentacam report and the oculizer report, and the ocular report is quite significant. Yeah, this is what it is. So we have done the biometry, but what we have done, and you can see that for the right eye, what we have chosen is an intraocular lens power of 15 for the right eye. And now the ASCRS calculator, when we took the ASCRS calculator, it suggested a value which was quite different. It suggested 12 diopters, but we took a 15 diopters. So the flap and the hinge needs to be protected also during the corneal incision, and we should take utmost care not to disturb the flap during the operation. Now look at this post-operative refraction that the patient got. So it was a 0.75 cylinder with 0.75 sphere with the one cylinder and 0.5 with the one cylinder. Now, if we go back to the formula, the suggestion by the ASCRS online calculator, we definitely would have had the surprise. It had suggested -12, as you can see there, whereas we gave the patient a 15 diopter. So here is where our intraoperative assessment by the retinoscopy came into big value, and we could get a patient who was nearly ametropic, regardless of the small cylinder sphere. So it's very important to cross-check on these biometries and also to be prepared that if there is a surprise. So the next surgery that a refractive surgery that is done is ICL, and for a post-ICL phacoemulsification, preoperatively, the biometric calculations do need to change. And the ICL is a very thin structure, and whatever biometry values are for phakic eye is something that is true for an ICL with a phakic eye. The explant of the ICL is only the key step prior to the phacoemulsification, and I'll quickly show you a small video in which, of course, it's a little bit of a challenging video. And you can see that what has happened is quite a lot. So what has actually happened? So let me just see if I can pause it here. Yeah. Now, this is a patient, and you can see that there's a PI there, there is synechiae, and there is an ICL also on the side. So let me tell you very briefly about the history of this patient. So this patient was a high myope, and we had checked out the fundus, which we do for every patient by ophthalmoscopy, and there was no treatable lesions for this patient, and we went ahead with the ICL surgery. We corrected all of -14 diopters of myopia that the patient had, and the patient was very, very happy. Actually, he wanted to get it done for a particular job. He was able to get the job, and then things did not start looking well. So what happened after that? So the patient came back in about 8 months' time, and he said that he was not seeing well. And when we looked at the fundus, we saw that there was a retinal detachment. Now, with the retinal detachment, we got our VR colleagues to examine, and they did a retina surgery and settled the retina. The patient regained from, he was getting 6/9 vision post-ICL. Now, after the cataract surgery, after the retinal surgery, he could see approximately 6/20 vision. So we said that you need to be happy with 6/24 vision, and then he came back a month later and he said that I'm not happy anymore because I have lost my vision, and it was just finger counting at about 4 meters. And then we said that fine, come back next month and we'll do the surgery. And when he came next month, this was what it was. So considering the amount of cataract that there was and the fast progression of the cataract, so we had to take this off. So we had to remove the ICL first and then do a cataract extraction in this patient. So now it's important to also remember that there is this amount of synechiae, and there are quite a few possibilities, and this case is going to be challenging. And we had a lot of discussion before we took up this case. Our VR surgeon was on standby, and he was more or less prepared to do the needful if the nucleus fell again into his domain. So the next part was removal of the ICL, and this has to be done. It's not a very difficult procedure, and as you can see, that grasping of the ICL by the special forceps which comes from the manufacturer, and then gradually removing it off is very important. At the same time, the the uh, maintaining the integrity of the ICL, and looking into the fact that this ICL has to come out intact, and it does come out intact. It folds upon itself, and hand over hand technique is used to remove this ICL from the from the sulcus. So once the ICL is removed and comes out quite dramatically and through that 2.8 millimeters incision that we had made, so it's removed down. So now we have the cataract nicely in place. So as you can see that the ICL is quite intact, and all that we need to think is the thing. So we stain the with tritime blue and anterior capsule, and though the stain is not taken up well because we used a lot of dispersive viscoelastic, but it has taken. So we things are not going to go very right in this case. So we debulk the intranenticular fluid, we take off as much as possible so that we are able to do manipulate our good capsule plexus. We use the Utrata in this case and replenishing the anterior chamber with dispersive viscoelastic time and again. But as you can see that there is a little bit of adhesion, and I'm struggling to make this anterior capsule plexus as simple as possible, as neat and as small as possible, but not succeeding well. What happened? The rhexis has run out, not in one, but two places. So now what do we do? So we were prepared for a rhexis runout or bone tear of the rhexis, Argentine flag sign, etc. And we had both the single piece as well as the multi-piece ready with us. But remembering the amount of cataract that there was, we removed this cataract. And now we have the answer why the cataract developed so early and so fast, why did it progress to this level. And you can see that there is an opacity right in the center of the posterior capsule, and that is where possibly there was a lens touch during the VR surgery. But nevertheless, so what do? We put in an intraocular lens, a three-piece intraocular lens, which should go into the sulcus, remembering the fact that we have rhexis runout in two places, and also that we have a central dense opacity of the posterior capsule. So, do you think that the patient is going to see well post-operatively? Well, not really, unless we do something for that central plaque that there is. And this central plaque is because of the lens touch. It is not a simple central plaque that you can just remove with viscoelastic and peel it off. No, it will not. So what we do is we negotiate it with the NVR blade, and we make a cruciate incision through the posterior capsule plaque, and then with the vitrector going under the lens, we remove the opposite side posterior capsule as much as possible. Here it is very, very important to be within that area of the posterior plaque and not run out into the clear area of the posterior capsule. So we do that as gently and as briskly as possible, and we are able to get a small opening of about 3.5 millimeter, which should suffice for the visual acuity to be restored. So after removing as much as possible, and the posterior capsule most of the cases now still intact, we take off the viscoelastic and we close the wound here, and this patient regained 624 vision that he had after his retinal detachment surgery. Post-operative challenges are the small residual refractive errors that can be managed with glasses or contact lenses for these patients. Large refractive errors, again, enhancement with LASIK or PRK may be offered if the parameters permit. A piggyback IOL or an IOL exchange is an option, and this is not. So thank you very much for your patient hearing. I think it's been quite a long session, and I'll just stop sharing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I'm sure that we all have got many useful tips together. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
But in the last case, with this dense cataract and with ICL in place, how was to determine the IOL? What is the way of biometry in these cases?
Come again, please, once more.
The last case, which is shown for the video, with dense cataract and ICL in place,
Yes.
how was to determine biometry?
Yeah. So the biometry is not very difficult in these cases because what we have with the biometry is the ICL only. So it's an intumescent cataract with an ICL. The biometry will follow exactly as you have for, and it was a vitrectomized eye, but no silicone oil was given. Gas was given in this patient. So it was a silicone oil free eye with retina surgery being done, and the calculation because of the ICL is not deterred. So the phakic cataract calculation on the biometer is what is taken.
Sir, the intraoperative retinoscopy which you showed, is there any direct method of converting into IOL power?
Just come again once, please. The
The
intraoperative.
intraoperative retinoscopy, which
Yeah.
one does, is there any direct formula to convert that into optical IOL power?
Yes. So whatever the retinoscopy value is, like if it comes to 7, then you just need to double it. Okay. And if you are a little on the myopic side, so we try and push it a little myopic and not total emmetropic. And of course, we cross-check with the formulas also. However, as I showed in that case, the ACRS online formula did not work or would not have worked had I used that power of the lens.
And when you take all the complicated cases like subluxated ones and all this, do you do them under topical anesthesia or you do them under peribulbar block?
Okay, so for all these patients, peribulbar block is what is definitely required, unless I am 100% sure that it is just the CTR that is going to work, and then I do not, I can do it, I do it under topical also. But again, having said that, I would really suggest that you do it under peribulbar and not under topical anesthesia, because the possibility of the complications which might come, and then you might have to put in a peribulbar block, or you might have to enhance the anesthesia.
And if we have a case of recurrent viral keratitis, and if we are planning to go ahead with the cataract surgery, should we start systemic antiviral pre-operatively, or we can just like any cataract surgery we can go ahead and do it?
Yeah. So in this case that Dr. Samar Basak had showed, so he had 4 episodes of viral infection in that particular eye, and the last infection was 6 months ago. So he used antivirals for this patient and continued it for some time. Yeah. So that is definitely an important aspect that we need to think. And again, because of it's a triple procedure, the possibility of using steroids is very high. You cannot get away with NSAIDs in such patients. Therefore, the use of steroid nearly becomes mandatory, and thereby you have to support it with the antivirals that he actually used and supports.
And had it been just a cataract surgery, not just combined procedure or combined surgery, then?
Yes. Now, if it is just a cataract procedure, then what I would do is I would definitely wait and see, not use antivirals, because remember the fact that 6 months ago, so not use antivirals, but at the first instance where there could be a possibility of a viral infection, then I would definitely. And here in these cases, the use of steroids, minimal to minimal steroids to be used, and more of NSAIDs to be used.
And what is your protocol regarding pre-operating specular microscopy in cataract cases? In which all cases you go for it?
Okay, so it's a very important question, Dr. Mamta, and I think we all need to remember that we have become experienced surgeons, we have become fast surgeons, we have become good surgeons, but at times what we are not is we are hasty on the slit lamp assessment of the corneal endothelium. So to be 100% sure that we have not missed a bad endothelium, it's important to have this tool, which is a very simple tool, the specular microscopy in our armamentarium. And we routinely at our foundation use the specular microscopy for all our patients. And of course, we are able to pick up the crooks which we have possibly missed in the slit lamp examination, and then have a relook at the slit lamp before subjecting the patient to the surgery.
Do you recommend it in all cases of premium IOL, sir, in pre-operative cases?
Yeah. Premium ions, though, definitely, specular microscopy definitely should be done in premium ions. And here again, having an oculizer, a specular microscope, and all these tools is not possible for every clinic to have. But if there could be a center where you could have access to these tools, it really works very well. And that is how a group shares certain tools, which is important for everybody.
And there is another question, sir. What is the material of that iris ring which you have shown?
The material of the
Iris ring that used for anidria testing.
okay. So it is, I do not know exactly the material, but it's an acrylic material. It's manufactured by Venu, and Morsher makes these rings very well, and but they're very, very expensive, the Morsher rings. If given an opportunity, one should use the Morsher ring, but as I said, 7 years down the line, this ring has really stood the test of time, and the pigments on the ring are still very intact.
Okay. And I just there is one question here, sir. At what time during cataract surgery the CPR should be placed?
At what time during cataract surgery?
The CPR should be placed.
The CTR.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah, this is again a very important question. I answered it during the slides, but I would like to re-emphasize once again. So the CTR for a subluxated lens is one of the most important and a primary tool. So as the norm goes, the CTR to be placed as early as you require it, but as late as you can postpone it. If you can postpone it to the last, that is fine, because what happens when the CTR goes in, it entraps the peripheral cortical matter, and thereby the cortical cleanup is definitely a little difficult. Whereas if you place it after the cortical cleanup, then the support to the bag is without this problem. However, the CTR aids in the phacoemulsification. Therefore, do use the CTR as a tool initially itself if the subluxation is large. So if it is large, definitely the CTR should go in after that. Remember the fact, something that you can do is you can do a multiple time dissection, hydrodissection. Even after the nuclear, after putting in the CTR, you can still do a little bit of gentle hydrodissection to loosen up the cortex.
Okay, sir. And there is another Dr. Abhishek. He asked most refractive surgeries from retrofit. Then how do the value will affect the IOL function?
No, I didn't get you. Come again once again, Mamta.
If after refractive surgery, if the patient is astigmatic, then why does keratometric value affect the IOL count? Like, why can't it affect other things? What's the difference which happens here when we call refractive surgery?
What is the fallacy of the biometry because of the keratorefractive surgery? Is that it?
Yes, sir. I think that's the question he wants to ask.
Okay, okay. So again, I answered this question in the slide also. So we use certain assumptions of the spherocylinder of the cornea to put in the SRKT or the SRK2, all these formulas. Okay. Now, if that if the dimension of the anterior curvature changes without the change of the posterior curvature, which it does, which is what happens in the keratorefractive surgery, then these assumptions are lost. You know, these assumptions don't hold good. And also because of the decrease of the thickness, that the refractive index 1.3375 also undergoes a change, and thereby the biometric formulas which are made on these assumptions are lost.
Okay. And the last question which we have is the Rexis marker which you were using, sir.
Okay.
Which company?
Okay, I think this Rexis marker has been designed by my very good friend Dr. Ajay Paul, and I think Joja makes them made them initially, but I think you will find it with so many other companies.
And you
It's a
use
very
the website.
nice tool, and it really gets your Rexis on the round, and good Rexis can be achieved with a good centration, as well as in these subluxated cases, you can actually decenter it a little so that a good centration of the capsular bag can be attained.
Okay, sir. And I think with this we have come to the end of all the questions, sir. Thank you so much for this elaborate talk and all the answers. And now,
Thank you so much.
Please carry on.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Today I operated on a patient who had undergone RK 30 years back, and I did his specular and I found his specular count exceptionally low.
Yeah.
Is there any connection between the RK and the endothelial count?
Yes, absolutely. And like whether
what is the physiology behind it?
Yeah, whether you do a specular in a patient who has undergone laser refractive correction is up to you whether you do it or not. But all patients of RK must undergo an endothelial cell count, because what happens in RK, it is actually not the severing of the cornea, but it is the inflammation that takes place, and that takes a toll, and there's a progressive amount of loss of endothelial cells because of the stretch of the integrity of the cornea, and that is how it overcomes the polymagatism also, and there is a definite loss of endothelial cells, and this is progressive.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your amazing presentation, for all the time that you gave. You had 3 presentations in one. I want to tell all the postgraduates who are listening now and who will be listening in the future on YouTube, one of the most approachable, I should say, office bearers of AIUS always has been, even when he was ARC chairman and as chairman scientific committee, for anything that you need help in ophthalmology from him, please feel free to contact him. I have his email and phone number, and he will be most eager to help, and he will be even eager to help PMCH students because he is an alumni from PMCH. Thank you so much, sir, for your time, and thank you so much for your blessings for the postgraduates. We sincerely hope that once the COVID era is over, you will be coming to Bihar sometime, and then we'll have a physical meeting also. Thank you so much, Dr. Mamta, for the amazing moderation that you have done this evening. And once again, I would like to thank Intas Pharmaceutical for bringing this all together, especially Manish ji and Chandrasekhar ji, who have worked so hard over the past few months on bringing this all together. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Mamta.
I'll just have one small word before we end, Satyajit, and it's to say something, and I want to say it at the end, because whatever we have achieved, each one of us at this stage of our life, we know that it is the blessings of our gurus through which we have achieved. And all my gurus are in Bihar, and there are so many gurus of mine in Chennai and in Kolkata. And I'm really blessed for them. And here I must say that my teachers at PMCH and in Bihar have taught me so much. That foundation was so good that I really could build up upon the foundation. And I'm really proud of having been educated in Bihar all my life. Thank you.
That is such an inspiration for all the postgraduates who are listening now. Thank you so much, and sometime in the future we'll trouble you again with these beautiful cataract surgery videos. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Mamta.
Thank you. Thank you, Mamta. Thank you, Satyajit.